You're watching VATV, bringing Brookline home.
Welcome to this prestigious event being held at Hidden Brookline. Some of you are probably wondering, what happened to Liz Walker's hair? I'm Malcolm Cawthorn. I'll be your MC for today's event. We'd like to begin with the Negro National Anthem, written by James Weldon, which will be performed by Brookline High School sophomore, Ms. Gigi Owens.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has taught us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
We have a lot of thank yous for those who helped make this day happen. They're all in your program, and I'm going to read through them and make a few additions as we go along. We'd like to thank Aramark, Brookline Access Television, Brookline Community Foundation, Brookline Department of Public Works, Brookline Economic Development Division, Brookline Historical Society, Brookline Housing Authority, the Brookline Police and the Brookline CERT team, Brookline Public Library, Brookline Public Schools, Brookline TAB, the Brookline Veterans Services Department, and a very special thank you to its director, Bill McGrady, who helped set up with a sound system for today, First Parish Church of Brookline, Friends of the Old Burying Ground, Garden Club of Brookline, Chobe Hoy, trustees of the Walnut Hills Cemetery. We'd also like to thank Erin Shute-Galantine, Director of Parks and Open Space Division at DPW, for facilitating the process of the engraving, and Anne Marie Cedrone of the Veterans Services Department for her assistance with production of the event poster. Human Relations Youth Resources Commission is led by Dr. Ed Wang, Karen Fisher, and Stephen Bressler. It's an honor to be here today, to try and fill into the shoes of the impeccable Liz Walker. Unfortunately, she had a conflict that prohibited her from being here today. However, she sent a message to all of us. It reads, "I'm so sorry I could not be with you today. However, my absence does not diminish my feelings about this very special ceremony. This day is about many things, but for me, it is about the power of light. Jesus once said, 'There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known.' What touches me most about our efforts to honor the memory of slaves of African descent buried in these unmarked graves is how together we are bringing a bit of light to one more dark spot in the world. That means there is one less lie corrupting the truth, one less touch of ugliness marring humankind's beauty. While this service is a single act in one community, it impacts the whole world. It matters enormously." Following the words of Liz Walker, I am truly honored to be involved with this very important event. As a son of Brookline, this is my proudest moment as a townie. Brookline is a liberal, open, accepting place for all people. Yet today we recognize those who have been silenced for centuries, those who had none of the freedoms expected in this country, and those who never benefited from the fruits of their labor. I have walked, biked, and driven by this graveyard hundreds of times. Yet, today is the first day that I really came to understand the power of this important place. I always knew it held history, a history of important people in the founding of this fine town. Yet today we recover the history of a people forgotten, a people who contributed to the establishment and greatness of the town and country for which we live, breathe, and cherish. Today we honor those who fought the bravest of fights, when as a country we were young and foolish enough to believe we deserve freedom from tyranny. Those who were faithful enough to believe in the words of revolution truly included the truths we all hold to be self-evident, that all would be equal in giving blood for their country and sacrifice for what is right, and in the future country that would be the example of freedom to the free world. Today we embrace the imported knowledge of vaccination, the willingness to share concern for the common man despite the degradation of bondage and practice of inferiority. The men and women who care for their masters' children and families, as well as town and country. 2 centuries later, here in Brookline, in Massachusetts and the United States, we embrace those who helped this country become the pillar of democracy, the pillar of economic opportunity, the pillar of medical technology and life expectancy, and the pillar of equality. Today we celebrate these lives, the lives of people who have been nameless, without history, and without the knowledge of this liberal, open community. The slaves who aided in the wealth of this town, who fought in the name of America and democracy, who never asked for more than their unalienable rights. Today, they will be etched into the eternal memory of Brookline's illustrious history. Thank you for being here today. We would like to extend greetings, and we've asked Chair of the Board of Selectwoman, Nancy Daly, to give a greetings to the crowd.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of all the members of the Board of Selectmen and the town, I welcome you all today. And I want to give special thanks to Barbara Brown and the other members of the Hidden Brookline Committee and Steve Bressler, who works with them, for making this happen. Can everyone raise their hand who's on that committee? And Barbara came to the Board of Selectmen a few months ago and was telling us about these gentlemen who are buried here anonymously, but who were recognized she'd noticed their names on a plaque in Town Hall and dug out the information. And one of them in particular later tried to escape. And I think as I was thinking about this and talking to other people and hearing from people a sense of outrage that you could drag a human being along with you to a war for freedom and independence and not give that person their freedom as a result, in the course of that. And in fact, this gentleman whose family name is on a prominent thoroughfare near us, was seen as a pillar of the community, and the law was in his favor when Prince, was it? Do I have that right? Later tried to escape, and he wrote this kind of nasty, Barbara's probably going to tell you more about this, ad to get him back. But I think and as I was feeling that sense of outrage, I was thinking, though, that the good thing about this is that we as a community, as a public body, can evolve, can change for the better, because we all look on that now with a sense of horror and something that we simply would not even contemplate today. And so, I think there's hope for us. It's not a perfect world, but we can make social change. for the better. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd also like Mr. Abby Cohen, Chair of the Trustees of the Walnut Hill Cemetery, to bring greetings.
Thank you. Honored guests, my name is Abby Cohen, and I am Chairman of the Trustees of the Walnut Hill Cemeteries, including the old burying ground. I bring you greetings on this occasion. The old burying ground is Brookline's historic cemetery. Several years ago, after receiving a report from the Commonwealth, Several years ago, after receiving a report from the Commonwealth on the preservation of historic cemeteries, the trustees developed a plan to embark on preserving this historic cemetery. With no town funds available, the trustees organized the Friends of the Old Burying Ground. The ongoing preservation work that is now ongoing is being paid for by residents' contributions. We thank the Friends of the Old Burying Ground, and particularly the chairperson, Dorothy Baldini, for their dedication and hard work. We are now planning to go forward with funding to preserve the tombs using private contributions, grants, and some town funds. We will continue to make the preservation of this historic cemetery one of our priorities. Today's dedication highlights why this cemetery merits our attention. It illustrates how Brookline's history continues to be enhanced as we look backwards at our town's struggles with issues of slavery and how far we have come from that point. This engraved stone will continue to remind us of this journey.
Speaking on behalf of the Hidden Brookline Committee, I'd like Dr. Barbara Brown to come and give a few words.
We've been thinking about this event for several years, so looking around and seeing all the people who are gathered here is an enormous pleasure. There is a proverb, in fact, widespread in Africa that goes, "We are people through our ties with other people." I stand here as part of that larger we, as a member of the Hidden Brookline Committee, which has done the research, the thinking, the planning for today. I stand here on behalf of the many others who also worked for today's commemoration. And finally, I stand here on behalf of all of you and us gathered together to acknowledge and honor these Brookline residents, these slaves. The journey to today began 10 years ago when we uncovered the history of the Underground Railroad here in Brookline and celebrated it with justifiable and great pride. Our history is complex and more than simply about the triumph of good over evil. As Hannah Arendt once said, we can no longer afford to take that which is good in the past and simply call it our heritage and discard the bad. Several years ago, this journey continued when I was in CVS. And I ran into Steve Bressler, the Brookline Human Relations Commissioner, who said, I really should check out the plaque in the front of Town Hall, which honors those who fought on April 19, 1775. I asked Steve why I should bother. He said, just go look. So I looked. I looked for famous names. There was no Dukakis there. I looked for women. There were no women there. And then I saw it. On a separate space at the bottom of the plaque were 3 names. Esquire of Boylston's Prince. Esquire White's Peter. Esquire Gardner's Adam. Few have ever seen this. Fewer have noticed. Adam is buried here and is one of those we commemorate today. The story of what happened to the courageous prince is a story for another day, because happily, he is not buried here. I phoned Steve, and in short order, we established the Hidden Brookline Committee of the Human Relations Commission. Our mission is simple: to bring to light the hidden history of slavery in town. By the way, we welcome new members, and there is indeed a sign-up sheet here. We began with research. In the mid-1700s in Brookline and neighboring towns, slavery was normal. It was part of the fabric of our town's life, although the population of slaves was not large. If you dined at Dr. Boylston's home, you would likely be served by a slave. When you walked to a neighbor's house, you might see a slave driving a horse and cart to take to market in Boston with Brookline's famous melons. At church, slaves would be praying in their separate section. Hidden Brookline also began walking tours for 4th graders studying colonial America. When our first group from Runkle School visited the cemetery, I asked them to find Adam's grave along with the graves of the other men who had fought on April 19th. They couldn't find it, though they could find Isaac Gardner's. I then told them about the other slaves buried here. Troubled, they and their teacher, Jay Sugarman, went back to school and wrote an op-ed for the Tab titled, "We Should Honor Brookline Slaves," which brings us to today. I would like to know if Jay Sugarman or any of his students are here today, if you would raise your hands. And together, we are doing just that, honoring the people who received no honor during their lives. We do not have the power to undo the past or heal the wounds these slaves endured, but we can acknowledge the pain in that past, and we can stand here in sorrow, and we can call their names. Hagar, born in 1717 and lived to be 50. She was named after a slave in the Bible. Felix, owned by Henry Sewell. Part of Felix's work was cleaning our town hall until his death in 1764. Boston, farmed for Dr. Boylston, Dr. Zabdiel Boylston, making it possible for the doctor to focus on his famous medical practice. Venus was baptized at the church up the street and died as a young woman. Kate was a child of 8 when she died and was buried here in the Sewell family tomb. Let us honor her short life. About the other slaves on this engraved stone, we have precious little information at this time. So I simply call their names and ask you to hold them in your hearts. Seiko, Charles, Dinah, Ben Boston. Others too were enslaved, lived, died, and were buried here, but their names are lost for us. Let us not forget them. We have gathered here today in common agreement that we and those who follow us shall remember who lived here, all who lived here, who walked the town's paths and roads, who had hopes and who suffered great sorrows, so that future generations will never again say, "I didn't know. I don't understand. So that this hidden history will no longer be hidden and instead be acknowledged as a sorrowful part of a fuller and more complex understanding of our town's history. Thank you.
Next, please welcome our guest and our keynote speaker, Representative Byron Rushing. Mr. Rushing first came to the Boston area when he began his undergraduate study at Harvard. Since then, he has been entrenched in community activism, political activism, and the recognition of African American history in Massachusetts and the greater Boston area. Mr. Rushing served as president of the Museum of Afro-American History and helped establish that as a fixture in Boston's museum and tourist circles, while elevating the museum to new heights with his procurement of historical buildings and notation of historical sites. Currently, Mr. Rushing serves as representative to the Massachusetts State Legislature for the 9th Suffolk District. Please give a warm welcome to Representative Byron Rushing.
Thank you very much. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I hope that all of the planners for this event are pleased with this fantastic turnout. I can only hope that the number of you standing represent the numbers they didn't expect to show up. And so this attendance is truly gratifying, not only to the planners, but of course to all of us who are here, to know that so many of us share in recognizing these important people, but also recognizing ourselves, recognizing these important people. Buried within the walls of the cemetery lie the remains of Adam, Ben Boston, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, and Charles, and other slaves of African descent who lived in Brookline and whose names are not known to us. In their memory and in their honor, this memorial is dedicated. I would like to use this opportunity to say a few words about that word, memory. When I worked at the Museum of Afro-American History, I did a lot of talking to young people about memory. And in most of those speeches and following discussions, I asked them to think about the opposite of memory. The opposite of memory, which is, of course, amnesia. When we lose our memory, we lose so much. We lose the ability to know where and when we are. And to not know where and when you are at an extremely disadvantage in deciding where and when you should go and be next. For if you have no memory, you have no present. And if you have no present, you have no place to make judgments and decisions and plans for a future. Some of us here are religious. And almost every religion has a word for the opposite of amnesia, a word for the most important memories. Christians use a Greek word for that. They call it anamnesis. It is the most important things that you should know. And so Muslims have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know about Muhammad. Christians have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know. Jews have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know, the things that they repeat again and again to their children to define who they are. And we are here engaged in an anamnesis. We are engaged in overcoming an amnesia about ourselves, an amnesia about our community, an amnesia about our nation, an amnesia about our culture. So we are here to recall, to recollect, to remember. This recalling will not be an easy exploration for us. Slavery and the slave trade in the Americas existed longer than emancipation and civil rights has yet existed. If you use 1619 as the approximate date of the introduction of slavery in North American British colonies that would become the United States of America, slavery lasted for 246 years. It will not be until 2111 that people of African descent will have been free as long as they were enslaved in the United States. Even in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, on that island that the Spaniards called Hispaniola, where the first successful revolt against slavery occurred, slavery lasted about 285 years. It will be 2085 before Haitians and Dominicans will have been free as long as they have been enslaved. To move from the myth of slavery as an incidental occurrence in the early days of the European occupation of the Americas to the truth of slavery as part of the truth of the origins of the nations of the Americas, and specifically of the origins and economic success of the United States, will require the production of a new memory, a new paradigm of our founding. Consider this in that new paradigm of our founding. The first record of a group of African people arriving in Massachusetts is found in John Winthrop's journal that he called The History of New England. In his July 1637 notation, John Winthrop wrote, "We had now slain in all about 700. He's talking about Indians, the indigenous people that they found here after their first war with them. "We sent 15 of the boys and 2 women to Bermuda by Mr. Pierce, but he, missing it, carried them to Providence Isle. William Pierce was the captain of the Desire, which was a ship built in Marblehead and sailed out of Salem. Providence Isle was a Puritan settlement off the coast of Central America." And then, in an entry dated February 26, 1638, Winthrop writes in his journal, "Mr. Pierce in the Salem ship the Desire returned from the West Indies after 7 months. He had been at Providence and brought some cotton and tobacco and Negroes from thence, and salt from the Tortugas." Lorenzo Green, the author of The Negro in Colonial New England, calls this statement the earliest recorded account of Negro slavery in New England. Negroes may have been enslaved before that time, but earlier allusions to slavery are inferential. The founders of who we are today as a nation, the founders of us as a nation, are all in this story. The Aboriginal, the Native people, the English, the Europeans, and the Africans. What in our language would be called the red, the white, and the black. And they all must be in this new paradigm if it is to approach the truth. Now, this story is, of course, a horrible story. But in this revised paradigm, it is not all awful. In this revised paradigm is our civic scripture. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, in decent respect to the opinions of mankind, requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our civic scripture, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. This new paradigm will always have space to ask, who is the our? Who is the we? Adam Hochschild in Bury the Chains, that history of the end of slavery in the British Empire, points out that at the end of the 18th century, when these words were being written, well over 3/4 of all people alive were in bondage somewhere in the world. In bondage. These were remarkable words to be said at that time. Yet, who were the our? Who were the we? In March of last year, then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice gave a remarkable interview. She was asked about race. And she said, well, you know, America doesn't have an easy time dealing with race. I sit in my office and the portrait immediately over my shoulder is Thomas Jefferson, because he was the first Secretary of State. And sometimes I think to myself, what would he think? A black woman Secretary of State is his predecessor 65 times removed. What would he think that the last two successors have been black Americans? And so obviously when this country was founded, the words that were enshrined in all our great documents and that have been such an inspiration to the people of the world, they didn't have meaning for an overwhelming element of our founding population. The black Americans were a founding population. Africans and Europeans came here and founded this country together. Europeans by choice, Africans in chains. And that's not a very pretty reality of our founding. And I think that particular birth defect, she says, makes it hard for us to confront it, hard for us to talk about it, hard for us to realize that it has continuing relevance for who we are today. That particular birth defect needs to be in our paradigm, our founding memory. And so we deal daily with this contradiction. This new paradigm will acknowledge all own these words by hearing, heeding, and incorporating them. What is remarkable about all of these words, written by so many slave owners, is that once they were written down, once they were spoken, they no longer belong to them. They no longer belong to them. When poor white men heard them, they said, "Oh no, we should be able to vote too." When women heard them, they said, "Oh no, we are not property inside families." When black people heard them, they said, "Oh no, we are in the we. We are in the hour." The words do not belong to those who wrote them or spoke them. They belong to those who hear them and heed them. This new paradigm is necessary to abolish the artificial concept of race, a construct invented in the 15th and 16th centuries and refined in the 17th, 18th, and 19th in order to make slavery more efficient by confining, reserving it to Africans and people of African descent, and preserved to the present in order to preserve their descendants in profitable states of discrimination and what we call racism. Maya Angelou wrote, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced without courage, need not be lived again." To do this recalling, this facing with courage, we must confront horror. In our paradigm is horror. In the paradigm of our founding, native aboriginal first people were killed to secure the land. Africans were worked to death in order to exploit that land. Before the suppression of the slave trade, the birth rate among most enslaved African women was always considerably lower than the birth rate in their birth rate in Africa. This only changed when it became illegal and thus too expensive to import Africans. And we must confront money, because it was all done for money. In 1860, more wealth existed in the accumulated value of slaves in the United States than in any other sector of the economy except land. Only the total value of land in the United States exceeded the total value of enslaved men, women, boys, and girls in this nation in 1860. 400,000 human beings who could be bought and sold. And this does not include the secondary economies to maintain slavery, the food, the codfish to feed them, and the Negro cloth to clothe them, and the chains and shackles to bind them were made. And that does not include the value of the products they produced, manufactured into rum and cigars, and the most valuable of all for the United States, cotton textiles. And this does not include the value of philanthropy. T.H. Perkins, a Bostonian, before the American Revolution, was a slave trader in Haiti. In 1785, he took part in what was then euphemistically called the China trade. The China trade, of course, began as a drug trade. And T.H. Perkins bought opium in Turkey and sold it in China. And in later years, Perkins became a philanthropist. In 1826, he and his brother James contributed half the sum that was needed to build an addition to the Athenaeum, the Boston Athenaeum. He donated his mansion to a financially troubled Massachusetts Asylum for the Blind in 1832. And they, in gratitude, renamed their institution the Perkins School for the Blind. This is a history that must be part of our new paradigm. Buried within this old burying ground are the remains of Adam, Ben, Boston, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, and Charles, and of other slaves of African descent who lived in Brookline and whose names are not known to us. The memory of them can be honored by becoming incorporated into our memory. The memory of them can be honored by us recalling the truth of slavery, that particular birth defect, as part of the truth of the origins of the nations of the Americas, and specifically of the origins and economic success of the United States, by us producing and using a new paradigm of truth. In the 19th century, Theodore Parker taught Bostonians, look at the facts of the world. You see a continual progressive triumph of the right. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long. Or as Martin Luther King liked to rephrase it, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
If we can place our attention to the memorial engraving where the kente cloth is draped over, please join me in giving a round of applause for these slaves who now have a voice in Brookline's history, by finally remembering and honoring and laying to rest the names you've heard so many times this afternoon: Adam, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, Charles, and Ben Boston. As we come towards the end of our program, we'd like Amode Wersingate to come and sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. She's a senior at Brookline High School, and if you notice on the back of your program, there are lyrics if you choose to sing along with her. Please welcome Amode.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet
just lastly, in Brookline wants to thank you all for coming today and celebrating the remembrance of a people who have finally gotten their due recognition. Please remain to enjoy the refreshments complimented of Aramark, which are along the sidewalk up towards the graveyard, and to observe the engraving at your leisure. Also, at the entrance to the old burying ground, there are white carnations that you can place on the marked graves of the slaves that we have come to finally give just due. We like to say the carnations are courtesy of the Friends of the Old Burying Ground and the Garden Club of Brookline. Please take flyers that are also on the way with information on Hidden Brookline and information also to tell you where the burials are. And thank you so much for coming out today and showing Brookline's wonderful face as we finally come to remember these people. Thank you.